Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2009 horror comedy, The Revenant. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I would like to give a special shout out to Steven for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. The link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, The Revenant is one of those films that it got a lot of acclaim from film festivals and different critics, but it's pretty much fallen under the radar and in between the cracks over the years. And it does have some fans, but it doesn't really seem like it's a film that's gotten like a massive cult following by any means, which is kind of surprising considering the fact that it has a lot of elements that I think would lend itself well to a cult audience. I think if it gets a release from a well-known label like Vinegar Syndrome or Arrow or someone in that realm, I think that that'll definitely help it get some more eyes on it because in all honesty, I liked this film. It's not perfect. I think there are some moments where the budget really does show the limitations of the production, and due to the filmmakers trying to be ambitious with some shots, it leads to some pretty chintzy and cheap looking scenes, especially when it comes to some green screen elements. And there's also some moments with the film where it doesn't necessarily work that well when it comes to the script, and the tone is not as consistent as it could be. But there's a lot about this that shows a lot of promise, and there's a lot of elements of this film that are pretty well executed overall. It's directed by a guy named Kerry Pryor, who also wrote the film. And I believe this is like his directorial debut. He did like maybe some shorts before this, but this was his first major feature film. And I think for a first time filmmaker, he does a pretty good job. I think there's some nice establishing shots, some great wide shots at times. And I think he definitely does inject a lot of the film with a certain signature style of fun and verve and vitality and overall energy to it. I think the shots are framed relatively well for the most part. I think when it comes to the very few uh, sequences that do deal with some heavy practical effects, I think those are shot in a way that definitely hides the rubber latex origin of some of the uh, effects gags in the film. And overall, like, yeah, it's a good sense of lighting and working within the limitations of the budget. There are some moments where some of the action scenes can be a little flat. So I think those could have been shot in a way that honestly could have been a little bit more thrilling visually, but they're not completely incompetent by any means. It's not a total misfire when it comes to those kind of sequences. And I do feel that he definitely provides a fairly consistent visual tone for the film and gets some pretty good performances out of at least the two main cast members. And his script is also a screenplay that, for the most part, I do feel is pretty good. I think the script could have been great if it really nailed the third act, but the first and the second acts I feel are really strong when it comes to this movie. The opening of the film definitely does grab your attention with Bart while he is in Iraq and he's with these other soldiers, and it's at night, and he sees what he thinks is a kid in the middle of the road, and he's the driver and he winds up hitting the kid. At least he thinks he hit the kid. So because he has a conscience and because he actually cares, he decides to disobey a order and stop the vehicle and go to see if the kid's okay, but then it turns out to be an ambush, and he winds up getting killed along with the rest of his team or his platoon and or unit, so to speak. And for whatever reason, he doesn't stay dead. He comes back to life. He gets killed in battle. They have a funeral for him. But one night, he just comes back to life. It's not really explained why. And I think that that could be a problem for some people. But, and I do feel that they had an opportunity to maybe explain it that could have tied into the third act better. So I think that that is something that's a bit lacking when it comes to the first act. But other than that, I think it's pretty well handled. There is some stuff involving this girl that Bart was in relations with before he went to Iraq, and Janet. And this girl then winds up sleeping with his best friend very early on in the movie, in the first act, his friend Joey. And that becomes a dramatic element that's utilized in the third act, or up until the third act, when it comes to the fallout between the two friends. But I don't know, that is something that definitely didn't really paint the friend in the best light right away. I think they could have shown that a little bit later. Maybe have that be a reveal later on in the movie, where he says he banged his friend's fiance or girlfriend, instead of showing him do that like the day that they had the funeral. Like that made the friend just come across like a really big asshole. And I think that's the intent. But when you have this whole scene near the end of the film where Bart is talking to what's left of his friend and telling him that how much he loves him, it comes across as a bit hollow because of what you saw him do earlier. Um, and I definitely don't feel there was really a moment where the friend like actively apologized for his actions, even though he definitely should have. It just kind of is insinuated that he felt bad about it at a certain point. But he sleeps with her, and later that night, Bart comes back from the dead, and he stumbles into this place and cuts out the stitches out of his face and has a very natural reaction to seeing that he's a living corpse. He like looking in the mirror and just being like, shit. And that's something I really loved about this script, is that it was very genuine when it comes to the reactions from a lot of people. It was very raw and real in that regard. And I also felt that as a dark comedy, there are some genuinely hilarious moments in this. And it starts out with Bart coming back to his friend's house. And of course his friend initially is like, "Who, come on, stop messing around with me." You know, where Bart's like, "It's me. It's Bart." It's like, "No, man, stop fucking with me. Like Bart's dead." It's like, "No, seriously though, it's me, Bart, your friend." And then he's his friend Joey's hesitant, like opens the door and then reacts very naturally, just like, "Holy fuck, holy shit, Bart, what the fuck, man?" And they have this night where Joey tries to make things as normal as he can by giving his friend a meal, but he can't keep it down because he can't eat solid food. So he just pukes up this black bile, and the reaction by the friend is pretty funny. And as soon as the sun rises, he passes out. And so eventually Joey, he goes to a friend of his who's also a friend of Bart's, in Maddie, who's a Wiccan and a nurse. And so he goes to her for help, tells her about Bart, shows her Bart, and then she's all like, Bart's a vampire. You have to cut off his head and drive a stake through his heart. You have to free his soul. Otherwise, he's going to walk the streets and he's going to drink blood and he's going to turn other people. So you have to kill him. You have to do it. You have to cut off his head and drive a stake into his heart. And of course, Joey's like, "Get me the fuck out of here." He goes, like, "This bullshit." Like, no, I'm not going to do that. And so as the film goes on, Bart keeps having these nights, where he will wake up and he'll have like these massive stomach pains because he's hungry for blood. And so eventually it leads to him and Joey working together to rob a blood bank. And that whole scene is just a riot because the nurse that works there, she's giving Bart all this crap, trying to convert him to Scientology of all things. It's like, your engrams are all off and I can help you. And of course, Bart's just like, give me the fucking blood, lady. And he gets the blood. He starts feeling better. So then he and his friend just go on a night out on the town, drinking beers and going to all these different bars and hitting on the girls on the street and just having fun, really. And that's something I really liked about the script for the most part, at least for a good chunk of it, is that it had this good vibe to it. It was just it was just a fun vibe. And the banter between the two friends was really funny and had a lot of charm to it and just sounded very natural when it comes to their back and forth. Like the whole bit where Joey, he tries out a crucifix and Bart's all like, "Come on, man, this is ridiculous. Like, just what are we doing?" It's like, does it have any effect? It's like, no, it doesn't have any effect on me. Come on, man. And then he rips, I got some holy water. And it's real holy water. It was blessed by an actual priest. So put out your hand, Bart. And Bart's like, come on, man, this is ridiculous. I don't want, this is stupid. And then it's like, no, put out your hand. And then he pours some water on his hand. And then the reaction from Bart is really funny. Just a great bit of sarcasm where he's just like acting like it's hurting him. He's like, oh my god, you poured water on my hand. And of course, you have Joey like busting Bart's balls after all of that. It's like, fuck you, man. You're a dick. So there's just a lot of fun with those two. And eventually, what happens after like the first hour or so, Bart and Joey decide to be these vigilantes, where Bart decides to start killing these criminals and drinking their blood. Because initially there's this situation where there's this gangbanger showed up one night when Bart and Joey were going to a like quickie mart kind of thing, a convenience store, and they were trying to get some snacks or whatever. And this guy winds up holding them at gunpoint, and he shoots Bart a bunch of times, but Bart doesn't die. So that makes it so Joey can hit him over the head, and then Bart feeds on the guy, and they wind up throwing the guy in the river later, and then they just start this trend of just going to these convenience stores or going to various different parts of the city and just taking out these criminals. And initially, it was just a Bart that was doing it. In one scene, he stops a rapist while he's like doing the "Do you feel lucky?" Quote from Dirty Harry, and then after a certain point, Joey joins in, but then Joey gets shot, and something goes horribly awry during one of these attempts to stop one of the robberies from happening. And this is all after they've already become this big news story, these vigilante gunslingers. And Joey, instead of dying, Bart winds up turning him. So now Joey is also Revenant. And what I liked too about the script is that it didn't necessarily make it clear that Bart was a zombie or a vampire. It was like he was just kind of like an in between sort of thing. So that's why they called him the Revenant. And so now you have Joey and Bart, and they're both Revenants, and they're creating this massive body count. And that's a part of the script that really is something that shows the low budget. Because of the low budget, it's just a montage and it's not very memorable. It's just a lot of scenes of the two firing guns and then news stories related to what they did, and that's it. So it's disappointing considering that you have these two essentially zombie vigilantes, and what you get is just a lot of just kind of generic looking montage scenes of them just shooting guns behind some really fake looking green screen effects. And there's one scene where they shoot a warehouse full of bad guys, but it turns out to be cops. That leads to Maddie getting involved, and she winds up getting shot by Joey because she's going to go to the police. She winds up telling Janet, who at this point earlier on, she knew about Bart and she's starting the relationship again with Bart. And she's waiting there for Bart. Bart comes home. She's waiting for him. She's so in love with him that she's deciding that she's going to allow Bart to feed on her, but it goes wrong. She winds up getting killed by Bart because he can't control his hunger. And this is what eventually leads to a war of words and bullets between Joey and his friend Bart. And they both fire bullets at one another. Their friendship essentially ends at that moment, at least so you think. And so now you're thinking that Joey's now going to be this villain character. Like he's going to be Bart's friend who's turned on him, and Bart and Janet are going to have to try to stop him. But instead, Bart kills Janet before she turns, cuts her head off, and then throws her body into the river. And then the gangbanger guy that Joey and Bart thought they killed, he shows up again, and he looks all comical because the fish ate his eyelids. And he gets revenge on Joey and cuts him up with a chainsaw, sends his head back to, Joey and Bart's place in a package. Bart doesn't get it until later, though, because he gets arrested by the police, who then put him in jail. But then when he dies again, because they can't seem to put two and two together that this guy is not alive, he's put in the morgue, and so he escapes from the morgue, goes back to his place, finds Joey's head, and you have this funny scene where he's getting Joey to talk with a dildo, but it's not a scene that is just done for comic effect. Like it's funny because of how absurd it is, but then it gets to a point where it's actually sad. And so I want to give the writer credit for that because he came up with such a wild idea, but he also found a way to make it into something was actually kind of tragic. And this is where the friendship between Joey and Bart is essentially patched up, but now Joey's nothing but a head, like something out of Reanimator. And Bart, he decides to do the right thing and puts Joey's head out of its misery and runs over it with a steamroller or some kind of construction equipment. And so you're thinking that, okay, Now he's gonna go and he's gonna find the gangbanger guy and his gang, and take them out, and we're gonna go from there. But no, that's never really a plot point that's ever referenced again. So you kind of assume that that gangbanger guy is still out there, which is not a good thing, by the way. And it's not satisfying because like he turned his friend into nothing but a head. Wouldn't you think he would want revenge? No, that's not what happens. So you're like, what? And then you have this whole bit in the third act where now the tone is completely shifting. Where now Bart's trying to kill himself, but unsuccessfully. Like he tries to shoot himself in the head, doesn't work. It's a great looking shot though of him in front of on this roof with this massive light up cross. He's on this roof of a building with this like neon illuminated cross, and he just puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger, but it doesn't kill him. Then he tries to hang himself, doesn't do anything. Then he tries to kill himself by getting run over with a train. All it does is make him lose an arm. And so you're thinking, what is the point of this? He knows that it's not going to do anything. Why is he continuing to try to do this? You don't really know. You don't really know where it's trying to go from here. There is another attempt by Bart, I guess, to try to kill himself by taking out this innocent woman on the train and eating her. So then he'll be targeted by the police. And so there's this gunfight that happens where the police are going up against Bart and they shoot him a bunch of times, but it doesn't kill him. And then for whatever reason, these police, they shoot a bunch of innocent people and then also shoot themselves in a really weird and just very awkward bit of the script. I don't really know what the intent was there. And then you have this reveal that, oh, there's all these other different revenants. So it's not just Bart, who were captured by the government, held in this underground facility in like suspended animation. And Bart, he gets captured by some people in hazmat suits and brought to this underground facility. And these revenants are now used as soldiers for war. And the last shot of the movie is them being dropped into combat, including Bart. And I'm like, I get what they're trying to do here, and it makes sense because I could totally see the military doing something like this. Hey, why use real soldiers when we can use dead people? But it's not executed very well because the third act just kind of comes out of nowhere. The whole bits where Bart's trying to kill himself unsuccessfully that just kind of don't really fit within the tone of the movie. You think that the whole thing with the gangbanger is going to be something that they're going to use for the climax. They don't do anything with that. And then Bart gets put in this facility, and there's these other revenants, one of which, and I'm not entirely sure, but I think it might be Janet. But I thought Janet was not turned because he killed her before she woke up. But there's this woman who looks kind of like Janet who has her head severed from her body. And I'm like, and she's like mouthing fuck you to all the people that are, coming by and visiting the facility. I'm like, was that actually Janet? If that's the case, like that's really fucked up. Um and I get it, it's trying to go for a darker ending, and it is a dark comedy, but compared to the other dark comedic elements of the movie, it's just too bleak. It doesn't really fit with everything else. I think what the director and writer was trying to do was something similar to Return of the Living Dead, the ending where they drop the nuke. But in Return of the Living Dead, it fit a little bit better with the tone of that movie. And it wasn't as clunky because it was just pretty sudden. And it was very to the point. With the way that it's set up in terms of the ending for this movie, it's clunkier. It's not as fluid. It's not as sudden. It just feels like it's more random than it. Well, I mean, it is sudden, but like it's just something that they drag it out a little bit too. So it's not like, oh, they dropped the bomb, boom, and credits. They drag it out a little bit more. So then you lack that suddenness, and then it just makes you think more about how this ending doesn't really fit with anything else that happened in the first and second acts. And other critics have pointed this out, and I definitely agree with this statement. It comes across like something that's from a different movie. So I really don't know what the writer was thinking here. Had some ideas, but just kind of threw them in there. He threw them into the mix, but didn't really think that clearly about how well those ingredients were going to mix with everything else. But like I said, I still like the film, and I ultimately still like the script, even with its issues. Now, for the most part, I think The Revenant has a pretty good cast. You've got David Anders, who plays Bart. I thought he did a great job. I thought he did a really fantastic job playing this character when it comes to showcasing this character's heart and the fact that this guy is just a normal guy who is trying to do the right thing, gets thrown into this extraordinary situation. And I think he did a good job showcasing the different nuances of the character, the different layers of the character. He was funny when he needed to be, he was charismatic when it was necessary, but he was also effectively emotional and morose and distraught when he needed to be as well. So I felt that it was a really good performance by David Anders. And Chris Wylde, I felt, did a pretty solid job too as his friend Joey. I feel the two, Wylde and Anders, had some really good chemistry with one another. They had a great rapport with each other. And I think Wylde, when he had to show his mean streak, I think he did a really good job showcasing that as well. So it wasn't all just fun and games with this guy. And I think if they wanted to show him as being a manipulative, a kind of psychopath once he becomes a revenant, they could have leaned in that direction. Uh, because I feel that Wylde handled that aspect of the character well, but they didn't. But I still think Wylde brought a lot to the film. Louise Griffiths, though, as Janet. That's a pretty weak performance. Like I didn't really think the performance is that great. I didn't think she had that great chemistry with David Anders either. Like, it was just not really the best performance. Definitely the weakest performance when it comes to all of the actors in this. I actually feel that Jacy King did a better job as Maddie, and I almost feel like the film might have been better off if you switched the roles. Jacy King played Janet, and Louise Griffiths played Maddie. Um, because I felt Jacy King was a better actress, and she had better chemistry with the other main performers in the cast, David Anders and Chris Wylde. There's some other actors like Emiliano Torres, who plays Miguel, the gangbanger. A few other people like this guy, yeah, who robs the ATM. David Uri, Kathy Shim, who plays Sophia Chang, or this guy who's known as the Minister, played by Wally White, or Clint Jung as Marty, who I think is the guy who runs a convenience store and is saved by Bart and Joey. But for the most part, it's David Anders and Chris Wylde's show, and they do the best that they can to carry this film as far as they can possibly carry it. The cinematography by Peter Hawkins, I think it's an honorable job for the kind of film that it is. I think it's shot fairly well, looks fine. The neighborhood looks very seedy and dingy. The apartment that Bart and Joey stay in definitely looks like a place that's seen better days. It's definitely one of those movies that visually, through the cinematography and through the direction and the production design and all that sort of stuff really creates a certain kind of look and feel to it. And the cinematography is a large part of that. So is the editing by Kerry Pryor. I didn't know he edited this as well. I mean, man, that's really impressive that he wrote, directed, and edited this and did a good job with all three things. It's a well edited film when it comes to what the movie was trying to do. The only times where you could say maybe some of the editing might look a little cheap or a little bit off is maybe during some of the few action scenes, some of the montage bits. But I think that's honestly more due to the green screen than necessarily the way that those scenes are edited together. The editing had a good amount of energy to it that, in my opinion, blended perfectly well with the energy of the direction. I do feel that it could have used more of a score. There really isn't a score for this. There's some songs, but they're not really that memorable, except for a couple. Like there's a couple songs in this I didn't mind. Like I like the song at the end credits, and there's a another song like closer to the beginning that I didn't mind as well. But either some more songs that really stand out and really add more to the movie, or some kind of score. I think that during some of the more emotional scenes, the score definitely would have helped. If there was a score, it didn't really register to me. I didn't really remember hearing a score. So if there is a score, it's a bad thing because that means that the score was just completely forgettable. But if there isn't a score, then I think they definitely could have had a score. Maybe like a synthwave score or something. I think that definitely would have fit this film well. And it's got a runtime of like 117 minutes, but in all honesty, after like the first hour, it drags a little bit because like I said, the premise and the promise that it has of having two Revenant gunslingers, it's never really fully realized because of the limitations of the budget. So what you see is just like some montage scenes that don't really get your blood pumping. So I think if you had like better action scenes in that particular part of the movie, that definitely would have elevated it a lot. And also if you had a more explosive and more dynamic climax. I know there's a lot of people who die in the finale, but it's a lot of innocent people and cops who I guess don't know how to shoot straight, but or shoot the right people. But it's just one of those things where yeah, there was a body count, but it just leaves you hollow. So it's one of those movies where it's got a lot of elements in it that I like. I think there's a lot of things about it that I think a lot of genre fans can enjoy. So I definitely do recommend it if you're a fan of the genre of horror or you like horror comedies. But it is one of those films though where it doesn't completely live up to its full potential. But anyway, that's my thoughts on The Revenant. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.